Good morning and welcome to the Daily Dose for Monday, June 29th. Advertising today has created an issue where often we may feel more like a product to own than a person to work with, right? Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt more like a project or a product than a person? This week on the show, I have two very special guests, Ryan Jesperson and Hope Schatzman from Dallas Baptist University. So, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Ryan and Hope.
Ryan, thank you for joining me on the Daily Dose of Hope. That may be 2 episodes by the time we get done with this. But I've had a topic that has been on my mind a little bit lately, and has been something that's been on my mind for 25 years as I've served churches in Oklahoma and Texas. Every church I go to asks me the same question. And I know Ryan's answer already, but we'll hear from him in a moment. But every church I've gone to asks me the same question. How can you get young families to come to our church? That's a question. This is my 6th church. I've been asked that every time that I've gone to a church. It's been asked every time I've interviewed at a church. When I've consulted with churches, they ask me the same thing. How do we get young families to our church? And the concern that I have developed, and the reason why I'm bringing you both on to kind of talk about this for a little bit, the concern that I have, I grew up in the 80s, so I'm the old man in the room, okay? And I grew up under the teaching and training of what would be called the church growth model, which basically said, bring in as many as you can, 40% will stay, just keep adding numbers. And that's a basic way, it's a simplified version, but ultimately it was, the people in your community are a commodity for you to gain in order for you to raise the level of your organization that we call church. And it was a very business-minded kind of situation. But my fear, and that I think has come to reality, is that churches simply look at what they lack in resource and then want to go find it in the community, do whatever it takes to get that into the church, and therefore people start to feel like they're a commodity that we want to own, rather than we are a community that wants to love the city and the town that we're in. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from on this stuff today, because again, every church is wondering, okay, as I come out of COVID, am I going to die? Am I going to survive it? Am I going to thrive after it? And how can we thrive? And I have a feeling that unless we have some strong conversations, we're going to revert back to our commodity mind that just said, okay, this is what we lack. Let's do this. What do we got to do that? And every outreach program that we have encountered for 30, 40 years now, I believe has centered around this commodity mindset more than a community mindset, church community relationship. So we'll just kind of start there. Give me your initial reactions and thoughts to that, and then we'll dive into some questions that we have. Go.
Hope, what do you think?
I would say, first of all, that it's very healthy and positive to evaluate as a church. I don't think it's a wrong thing to be asking the question of, why does our church look the way that it does? What are we lacking? And what do we need to do about it? However, the answer that we have is really important, and I think telling of just our mindset of what ministry is and even what the purpose of the church is. But I would say too, specifically in regards to the question of young families as a commodity, it may suggest just a deeper issue of understanding the value of people as a whole. Why all of a sudden are young families more important than an elderly couple or a middle-aged single person. I think it suggests a deeper rooted issue of the way that we view people, and ultimately the way that we reflect the heart of God in the way that he sees people. And so, finding some kind of special value or asset in a young family, why are we not seeing that in other types of people as well?
Sure.
And I think, maybe it just suggests, having a more open mind and really open hands as church leadership to be able to say all people are valuable. And while we can be intentional in our growth and wanting to be diverse even, how can we do that in an authentic way that reflects God's heart, that values all people and not just a specific group of people?
Sure.
And I think that maybe when we correct that, it might naturally lead into being able to better relate to young families.
Yeah, that's really good. And thank you, Hope. That's strong. My experience has been very similar to, I think, yours, Aaron, that the conversation has always revolved around how can we reach young families? And I would say churches typically define young families, older, more established churches typically define young families as the kind of people we had back whenever the church was hitting its stride. All churches go through they go through a growth time, and then there's a plateau time, and then there's usually some decline that happens. And so when churches were growing, they want to know, what does it look like to find young families that look like that? And there's a couple of issues with that. One, just like Hope talked about, there is value in all kinds of different people. There is a value in and it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's rich, poor, whatever ethnicity. That's who God has called us to reach. And I think the other issue with that idea is oftentimes the young families that were once in that community, they don't necessarily exist in that community anymore. They're not necessarily there anymore. And so I think we've got to get to the point where we look at communities as a place to reach, as a place to serve, not necessarily that it's going to come back to bless our church. Now, I get it. I've pastored. I'm pastoring a church right now. I mean, I literally on my email just a second ago, I saw a stewardship letter. We're writing another stewardship. We've been doing that once a month, and so I get the fact that churches have to find a way to continue their ministries. I get that. But what I'm convinced of is that if a church will love Jesus well and do spiritual formation and do discipleship, and then love people well and go into the community and say to anybody, hey, you are welcome here. We love you here. We want you here. I'm convinced God's going to bless that. Where I pastored, it was in a mental health corridor. And so on Wednesday nights, when we had our Wednesday night meal, we would have people that were mentally ill come to our Wednesday night meal. And my attitude about that was always, let them come, let them be here, because I think God's going to bless us if we're a blessing to them. And in that particular church, I mean, that was absolutely true. I mean, God blessed us financially in some pretty, unusual ways. It didn't all come from tithes and offerings. I think the primary way God's work is, God's church is funded as through tithes and offerings. But in that church, it wasn't the only way. In fact, it was probably about half the way the church was funded. And so, but I'm convinced, because that church had for years loved that community, and because they reached out, and I mean, listen, what I did as far as reaching out was, I was just in a lot of cases, I was just doing a lot of what they had already done. But because that had happened, I'm convinced that's why that church was blessed financially. I was asked one time if I was bussing in mentally ill people, and I literally almost said, well, why don't we start? But we weren't. They were just coming. And part of it, they were coming because we loved them. But then we would get other people that would come that could, be helpful as far as financially, or they could be helpful as far as, working in Sunday school or working in small groups or something like that. And so I just think if you get out there and you welcome all people, God's going to take care of the needs you have.
And to be fair, for the churches that I've served, they haven't not wanted to reach all people.
Right.
And there's certainly, and I don't think any church worth its salt anyway is going to say that we don't want other people. I just haven't found one yet that says, hey, let's go target the 80-year-old.
Yeah.
And I think part of it may come out of it's this sense of securing the future. Ryan, you mentioned that a little bit, that we're all wanting to secure the future. We understand the benefit of how the church community and the fellowship has benefited us, and we want that to move forward and to move on. But and so our focus then tends to be on, reaching younger than me, so to speak. Whoever is saying it, they're saying, let's reach younger than me, because there's this sense of, if you reach me, then there's a time limit on that. We're you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that there's a danger. What I'm hearing you both say is that there's a danger here if we isolate out one particular group and say, let's go after that group.
Well, I mean, for so long, I mean, there was, part of the church growth movement, and I'm a big fan of Rick Warren. So let me just say that right off.
Okay.
But when he came out with Purpose Driven Church, and there's a ton of stuff. In fact, part of my calling to the pastorate was from reading Purpose Driven Church. So just hear me say, I am a big fan of Rick Warren, like a big fan. If he probably won't hear this. I mean, I don't know, Aaron, you may have more reach than I know, but I'm a big fan. But Saddleback Sam and Saddleback Samantha, that was the let's target a very specific audience in this community, and let's reach them for the gospel. Mm-hmm. And that's who we're going to target all of our ministry towards. And I just think that's the wrong approach. Now, let me also say that Rick Warren, I think, is reaching all kinds of different people, and they're doing ministry all over the world. So Rick Warren is not a bad guy. I'm just saying I personally disagree with that particular philosophy. It's called the homogeneous. I mean, you know this.
Oh yeah,
you'll know this. It's called the homogeneous, where basically you're trying to reach that same kind of person. Where instead, I think you take up, 1 Peter 2:10. Once you are not a people, but now you are the people of God. I mean, I've always said that the most natural thing we will ever do, and I'm saying the most sinful natural thing we will ever do, is segregate ourselves, right? So we segregate into churches, but what is supernatural is seeing a church that is multicultural. That only happens supernaturally. And so I think there's just got to be something said for that, to try to reach a community, to love a community, to whosoever will, please come, please be a part of this. And then I think God will take care of it. I think God takes care of the results of all that. And I would think, and I hope you would know this better than I would think that is, because I'm 41, right? So I always joke with them in the office. I wear button down shirts that are short sleeve. I think that makes you old. I didn't start doing this till I was 40, but Hope, I would say, or I would think that a younger person would be attracted to that kind of model. Am I wrong about that? That a younger person would be attracted to the model that says we want to reach everybody for the cause of Christ, and we want to, regardless of their income, regardless of their education, regardless of their ethnicity. I would think that'd be something that a younger family would be attracted to, or at least some younger families.
Absolutely. I think that, a lot of the people kind of surrounding my age range at 24 and even late 20s, early 30s, and younger. It's such a culture right now, even that we're all living in, of truth is relative, and accept everyone and everything. And so I think to say that people would want everyone to be welcomed and everyone involved is an understatement. And so I think it's important to, as believers, hold fast to what is true and to our scriptural convictions, and then pair that with everyone is invited to this party. Everyone is invited to learn what our God says about what life is and how to live it to the fullest.
Right.
The best thing I can think of is at my church home at Rush Creek. Our pastors have this just great picture of what this looks like in our communities, and how we naturally build that diversity of age, race, everything in our church. And they use this picture of, if God were to take his hands and scoop up everyone within a 10-mile radius of our church, we would hope that our church membership would be reflective of the ratios of who is in our community, what their age is, what their race is, that it should just naturally be reflective of the community around us. And if it's not, we need to evaluate what we should be doing differently. And I think that plays out. My mind just goes to John 15, and I'm the vine, you are the branches. And when you think of just a tree or a vine, branches reach the ones that they are closest to. This authentic reaching out of, which branch am I touching? Who do I need to love on? And if we are isolating ourselves too much, maybe we need to be growing a little bit so we can spread out and reach different sides of the vine. So I think there's just this natural picture in John 15 of what discipleship looks like, and what it looks like if we truly are abiding in Christ and holding fast to his truth in a world where truth is relative. You do what you want to do, I'll do what I want to do.
Right.
Really holding fast to the vine, and if we're really holding on to the truth of God's word and being unwavering in that, I think the Lord, like you said, Ryan, is going to bless that. And it is going to help us learn as the branches how to reach out to the people around us in a natural way, and then they reach out to the people around them. And it's just this beautiful picture that God has set up for discipleship. And really, if we're a healthy church that's doing that right, I think in that picture of, if the Lord were to scoop up in his hand a community of people, our church would be reflective of that.
I love that picture, Hope. Thank you for sharing that. That's an interesting way to visualize how a church should reflect its community. For a church that may still be trapped in the other kinds of ideas, what word do you have of guidance to help us move from a one-way view of what we need to this idea of, this is our community, how do we reflect it best in our people? How do we shift from the isolated to the multiple kind of concept that we're all talking about now?
Yeah, I think that, if we're struggling to reflect that natural image that the Lord has set out for us in Scripture, I think that is just a heart issue between us and the Lord. I think we, as believers, individually and corporately, are truly walking with the Lord, being refined by the work of his Spirit as we saturate ourselves with his word. I think that naturally our heart is going to start to look more like his. We'll be more reflective of him. And so to be able to say, Lord, help me have your eyes to look at people the way that you do. And I think whenever we do that, we'll kind of have this natural shift of, leaning that way. And still, if we're struggling with that, look at churches who aren't. Look at churches who are thriving and say, hey, how did you break past that? Help me see things differently. Just being able to have open conversations like this, where you're allowed to have room for growth and to say, hey, I want to see this differently. I am struggling. Help me to see it differently. I think the Lord will honor that desire and bless that desire and help us grow into a new mindset. And perhaps that struggle is really just a kind of a generational gap of, not understanding, these millennials or these boomers or whatever it may be, just kind of breaking down these stereotypes, right? And being open to saying, I'm wrong, or, maybe you're not wrong, but I'm just going to love you through it and love you through our differences.
I'm not going to rub your face in it either. So.
Exactly. Well, I think just as with anything, it's a matter of humbling and a willingness. And I think that when we have that, the Lord is going to bless that because it's his church. And if we are willing to be used by him, he's going to make it look like what he wants it to look like.
I just want to dive into another moment here. Hope 24, smack in the middle of millennial, maybe even on the younger side of millennial.
So.
Do you get tired of being tagged the millennial? No, I mean, just an honest question. I mean,
yeah, no, I mean, I really don't, because that's just not where I find my identity. So I try not to really be an easily offended person. It's right. Like, okay, do I have a shorter attention span? I don't know. I don't know. If you see that in me and you love me as a person, I would hope that you would be willing to pull me aside and
right.
anything in me. But I do think that just as with anyone, even my own prejudices of, saying, oh, well, they probably just think this, or they probably just view it that way. I think that we do ourselves a disservice to limit people to certain stereotypes. But then to also say, even if that stereotype is true, okay, let's give it the benefit of the doubt and say it's true. Okay, even then, that's what we've been given. Those are the people we've been given. So let's learn how to love and steward them well and guide them to look more and more like Christ. Just like the generation before and after me has their own issues too. We're all human. And if we can just learn to walk in humility together and be refined and be sharpened by one another and realize, hey, you know what? You think that I'm this way? Okay, well then help me, walk me through that and help me be different. And you know what? Maybe I see something that's a little bit off in you. Let's walk through that. Let's talk about that together. So I think if we are really being relational in our ministry, I think that those kind of natural stereotypes that maybe are offensive or maybe we get a little bit sensitive to, I think that maybe if we really, truly realize our care for one another and our godly love for one another, I think those are going to kind of dissipate and maybe we can even laugh about them at one point,